Hi, crafties, and welcome to Weekend Crafting Adventures. I'm Kim, and in this episode, I'm going to share with you my experience etching some metal cuff bracelets with the Cricut Engraving tool. So, let me tell you a little bit about the inspiration behind this crafting project. Lately, I have been really interested and into wearing some of these bead word bracelets that have like one or two words, just small little plastic bracelets with a word or a saying, just kind of a little bit of pick me up or motivation. And so that is one inspiration behind this project. And the other one is that in February, not only is it Valentine's Day, but it's also there is a day called Random Acts of Kindness Day. And this is something that we learn about in the schools. And as a school counselor and a school teacher, something that is very important to me and near and dear to my heart is just filling up the kids' buckets and the staff's buckets with positive appreciation, motivation, just really doing some small little random acts of kindness, whether it be for the coworkers or the students or anybody on the staff, just to let them know how much I appreciate them, the work that they're doing, all of that kind of stuff. So combining that idea of the little word bead bracelets and then the thought of Valentine's Day and Random Acts of Kindness Day, I thought it would be really cool to make some words and sayings etched onto some of those small metal cuff bracelets. And so that is what I did for this crafting project. And this was a really fun project. Anything that brings some positivity, pick me up into my life and somebody else's life is something that definitely motivates me. So this project was one of those. So let me talk to you and highlight a couple of materials that are super important for this crafting project if you decide that you are going to give it a try. I was lucky enough that I only had to buy the engraving tip tool, which is number 41, is the engraving tip tool. And I just had to buy that little engraving tip because I have the QuickSwap Housing, it's called. And so that engraving tip was about $12. And then I did need to purchase some bracelet blanks. And I got two different sizes. I wasn't really sure exactly what size I was going to like better on my wrist and then possibly on coworkers and things like that. So I got two different sizes. I got the 3/8 inch by 6 inch long metal cuff bracelet and the 5/8 inch by 6 inch long. So two different sizes. The other reason I decided to try two different sizes was I was really a little bit nervous about the real thin 3/8 inch bracelets. I love the thickness of them because I feel like when I'm wearing one, it'll really go nicely with the beaded bracelets. It won't be too thick, and I can still stack up my beaded word bracelets with this 3/8 inch bracelet. But I was a little bit worried about getting the words and the engraving onto that thin of a blank. So I made sure that I got some of the 5/8 inch as well, just as a backup in case I completely failed with the 3/8 inch bracelets. So I got 2 sizes of those from Impress Art. The other important material that I needed to get for this was a bracelet bending tool. I got one. I did not get the Impress Art one because the only way they had that was in like this big bundle, and I really didn't want to buy the huge bundle. So I searched and found just a standalone metal bracelet bending tool, and I think it ran me about $10. So I will share, of course, all of the materials that I used for this project on the blog post, but those were the main ones that are different from everything else that I kind of already have in my crafting corner for crafting with Cricut. So let me get into the experience of etching these metal cuff bracelets with my Cricut Maker. I was super excited about this, and after I decided I was going to do this project, I knew I needed to come up with a couple of phrases, a couple of things that I wanted to have my Cricut engraving tool etch onto the metal blank bracelets. So that was really fun. Always thinking about things that are motivational, pick-me-ups, something that I would like to have on my wrist, something that I would like to give somebody for them to wear as a little bit of a pick-me-up. And I had a couple of different ideas. I think at the end of all of the looking for different phrases or sayings, I came up with about 4 or 5 that I was going to try to have Cricut etch into these metal bracelets. One of them was ride or die. And when I think about that saying, it really makes me think about the people in my life that I am there for no matter what, and that are there for me no matter what. And I just happen to have a BFF that is turning 50 very soon, and I'm not going to be able to be there with her. We live pretty far apart, but I decided one of the things that I was going to do was to make a ride or die bracelet with right before the word ride would be a sunrise, and then after die would be a moon, just kind of with that thought of, I'm there for you day or night, no matter what. You're my ride or die friend. And so I did make one of the sayings ride or die, and I'm really happy with how it came out. But anyway, I got my sayings, and all of them, all of the bracelets I make and all of the sayings, I will post pictures and have them all listed out on the blog. But then I needed to figure out how I was actually going to get these things onto the bracelets. I wanted to know the best fonts to use, the best size to use, how I was going to actually make sure that these sayings were in the right place to be etched onto the bracelets. And that took some scouring of the internet for some resources. And there are a ton of resources about this process, but I'm going to highlight 4 that I used that really, really helped me in this process. So the resources that I really relied on for this project, 2 from Clever Someday. One was a YouTube tutorial and one was a blog post. Angie Holden, who has so much amazing information about Cricut crafting and other things out there. She really had a great resource page and YouTube video about metal etching and engraving with the Cricut Maker. So I utilized that as a resource. And then a blog post from Sharon and Alex. All of those gave me all of the information that I needed in order to make sure that I was not going to completely fail with this project. So in terms of the next piece of what I did was, after I researched and really got a good grasp of what I was going to have to do to make this work and to make sure the etching was going to end up on the metal bracelet, was to find the fonts that I wanted to use. I had lots of different ideas of combining fonts and images and things like that. But because this was my first time doing it, I really did not want to get too complicated. I wasn't sure how this was going to work. So I decided to go with two different Cricut fonts. One is the Alyssa stencil script font, and the other one was DTC porch chair font. Both of those are Cricut fonts, and both of them were recommended in the resources that I mentioned as being two that really did a good job with the engraving tool on the metal bracelets. And so even though I kind of wanted to get a little more creative and have each bracelet have a different font, I did end up sticking to those two fonts, and I'm glad that I did. I did figure out how to add a heart. One of the other sayings that I did was be a kind human. I just recently, in our schools and all around, am just so appreciative of the kind people that I am surrounded by. And, I just really feel like that is something that I wanted to put on the bracelet. So one of the sayings is be a kind human. And I did figure out how to get a little heart to also have on that bracelet. Another one of the sayings that I decided I wanted to do with Valentine's Day coming up was all you need is love. And that one I also was able to get a little bit of scripty swirls with some hearts to also etch onto the bracelets. The more simple the font with just one layer, the better for the etching. After I figured out the fonts that I was going to use, I wrote up on my Cricut design space the different sayings and phrases that I was going to have etched on the bracelets. And in order to do this, the first thing I did was to create a rectangle out of the shapes in Cricut Design Space to the exact size of the bracelet. That meant that I had two different sizes of rectangles. The first one was going to be 3/8 tall by 6 inches long, and the second one was a 5/8 inch tall by 6 inches long. And I went ahead and made those rectangles, and then I clicked onto the operation of the guide. This guide tool is something I've talked about before, and it is so useful, especially for projects like this. I needed to know exactly how big to make the words and the sayings and the designs that I was going to have my Cricut etch onto the bracelets, but I didn't want that rectangle to be part of what Cricut cut out. So using that guide tool allowed me to line up my saying and size it perfectly for the bracelet that it was going to be etched on. I'm going to tell you this was the trickiest part of this project. These the engraving tool is so precise, and I was dealing with, 3/8 of an inch tall for one of the bracelets. That's pretty small. So the fonts are small, and the biggest help I had was not only that guide, but using the align tool that is located at the top of Cricut Design Space. Once I had my rectangle guide and I had the saying or the words that I was going to have etched into the bracelet, I attached those using the attach tool, and then I'd bring it up, select both the rectangle and the saying, and I would hit align center. That tool centered my saying onto the guide rectangle. That was so important for making sure that when I went ahead and hit make it and had Cricut then engrave those sayings into the bracelet, I made sure that it was going to fit and that it was centered. I spent a lot of time going back and forth between the Cricut Design Space, where you plan out your design, and the prepare mat, where you are looking at exactly where Cricut is going to cut your design, and going back and forth between those two pages and really identifying exactly where I needed my saying to be. That is where I placed the metal blank bracelet on my cutting mat. And I used a strong grip mat. I used painter's tape to hold the bracelet down. And I really took care in making sure that everything was aligned. That really was the trickiest part of the project. I was actually really pleasantly surprised at how quickly Cricut engraves these bracelets. I guess I kind of was thinking back to when I did the basswood project and how it had to do 14 passes just to do one cut, which wasn't even what I ended up with. I had to do a lot more than that. But I kind of was wondering, is this going to be the same kind of process? And it actually wasn't. Making one bracelet, once I hit that little go button for Cricut to start engraving, I would say 3 minutes tops for each bracelet. So really the engraving piece goes pretty quickly, and it actually worked really well. I will say it was definitely much easier to use the DTC porch chair font than the Alyssa stencil script. And the reason that it was much easier is that the DTC porch chair font is all in capitals. The engraving tool did a beautiful job with both fonts, and it did a great job with the little accents that I added to some of the sayings, the hearts, the swirls. I did that sun and moon. Beautiful job. So I'm really happy with how the engraving tool worked on these metal cuff bracelets. After the engraving process was done and my bracelet came out of the Cricut machine, I did use the lint roller just gently to roll over that bracelet, because I did read that there could be tiny pieces of metal from the engraving process that are lying around on top of the bracelet. And so that was a great way to get all of those little metal particles away from the finished product. And I did try to use an enamel marker, a black enamel marker, to darken some of the engravings. And what I had read about this is that by doing that process, you would be able to see the words much better. And I do think that that is the case, but based on my experience with that black enamel marker, I didn't love how the finished product looked. It just didn't look clean and crisp to me. And so for my personal taste, I am sticking with just the metal etched by the engraving tool, and I am not adding any color or anything to that. By the time I finished up with my bracelets, I did have more success with the 5/8 inch bracelets than the 3/8 inch bracelets, just because the space that I was working with was so small with the 3/8 inch that there were times with the script font where, even though I was really precise in lining it up, it just ended up engraving a little higher than what I thought it was going to do. So when that happened, some of the engraving was a little bit cut off, and it wasn't the outcome that I wanted. I do like the look of the 3/8 inch bracelet a little bit better than the 5/8 inch. So I'm just going to have to practice a little more with the placement and understanding how to get that saying in the right place so that it engraves right in the middle of that 3/8 inch bracelet. So the sayings that I ended up with, I think, like I said, I ended up with around 4 sayings. Be a kind human. All you need is love. Ride or die. And then the other one I did was fire in her soul and grace in her heart. So those, I think, were the 4 that I did. I might try and make a couple more. I do have some left over. And again, I'll be giving those to people for Random Acts of Kindness Day. Also just to my girlfriend as my ride or die, and just kind of little pick-me-ups for people that are just doing great things for kids out there in my schools. So my crafting keepers for this episode. The first one is going to be the align function. I talked about this. It's where you hit align and then you have all these choices, and I hit center. I really don't think that I could have done a good job making sure that my sayings would be centered and within the bounds of that rectangle guide for the bracelet if I did not have access to that centering align function. So that was huge. That is going to be a crafting keeper for this project in terms of the small spaces and etching onto the bracelets. And then the other crafting keeper is this QuickSwap housing for the engrave tip for the Cricut Maker. This housing actually is the same housing that has my scoring tool that I can put on it. I now have the engrave tool, and I think there's about 4 or 5 other tips that I can get that swap onto that housing. And getting the engraving tip on and off, 2 seconds, easy as anything. So that is a very cool thing to have. It's a little more expensive, but it's an investment because now I can just switch out those other tools depending on the project that I'm doing. My satisfaction rating for this project is going to be a 4. I would say that this is a little bit of a trickier project if you're using the 3/8 inch bracelets. With some practice, I know I'll get better at it, but it definitely took me a really long time to figure out the placement on those guides and to make sure my Cricut was going to cut in the right place on the bracelet. So this I still need to practice, but I love the outcome of the bracelets. I did end up making a cute little drawstring cotton pouch bag to put each of them in with the same saying that's on the bracelet on the outside of those pouches with some heat transfer vinyl, and those came out really cute. So it was a really fun project. I'm looking forward to sharing them with friends and coworkers as a little random act of kindness. So until our next adventure, take care.
That's all for this episode of Weekend Crafting Adventures. Now go get that Cricut machine off the shelf and get crafty. For more information on this crafting project, interesting tips, tricks, and techniques, visit WCApodcast.com. Until next time, when we embark on another adventure.